Hey, it's Krieger here, and in this video you'll finally understand what is the Animus and Anima and why they have nothing to do with gender. We'll explore how Carl Jung came up with these ideas based on the Eros and Logos archetypal principles, how they function as a compensation for the persona and their differences. This video continues my Demystifying Jungian Psychology series, so I'll assume that you understand the basics of psychodynamics, the psychological types and archetypes, which I covered in my previous videos, and you can check this playlist over here and also down below. And everything is based on my book Pistis, Demystifying Jungian Psychology, and you can claim your copy when you join my newsletter. For this video, I'd like to express my gratitude to my teacher Fernando Rodrigues, who unlocked my understanding of the Eros and Logos, as this allowed me to organize my knowledge and add my own experience. So the first thing we have to get out of the way is that when we are discussing these concepts, we are not discussing gender. We can't equate anima with women and animus with men. As we've seen in the first video, Jung had an empirical approach. This means that he didn't invent these concepts out of nowhere. Rather, he found these archetypal images following the comparative method, after studying a plethora of myths, religions, cultures, and dreams. Never stated how man or woman should be. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Archetypes transcend the personal and individual level, and of course gender. Now, before we discuss the Animus and Anima, we have to explore the concepts of Eros and Logos, because they are the generating archetypal principles of the Animus and Anima. And Jung regarded both concepts as intuitive ideas, which cannot be defined accurately or exhaustively. He says that from a scientific point of view, this is regrettable, but from a practical one, it has its value, since the two concepts mark out a field of experience which is equally difficult to define. So these concepts cannot be grasped solely intellectually, as about half of the experience with the unconscious can be translated into words and theory, but the other half has to be lived and embodied. That's why knowledge of myths, symbols, and real experience with the unconscious are essential to fully understand it. So, that said, I'll do my best to explain these ideas and point you in the right direction, so you can build your own understanding. In the Red Book, Jung gives us an interesting description of these intuitive ideas. He says, a descendant of Logos is Nous, the intellect, which has done away with the commingling of feeling, presentiment, and sensation. In contrast, the Logos contains this commingling, but it is not the product of such blending, or else it would be a lower animalistic psychic activity. Yet it masters the blend, so that the four fundamental activities of the soul become subordinate to its principle. It is an independent principle of form that means understanding, insight, foresight, legislation, and wisdom. The figure of an old prophet is therefore a fitting allegory for this principle, since the prophetic spirit unites in itself all these qualities. In contrast, Eros is a principle that contains a commingling of all the fundamental activities of the soul just as much as it masters them, although its purpose is completely different. It is not form-giving but form-fulfilling. It is the wine that will be poured into the vessel. It is not the bed and direction of the stream, but the impetuous water flowing in it. Eros is desire, longing, force, exuberance, pleasure, suffering. Where Logos is ordering and insistence, Eros is dissolution and movement. There are two fundamental psychic powers that form a pair of opposites, each one requiring the other. And by the way, when Jung talks about the activities of the soul, he's referring to the four functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. And to simplify things, Jung relates these archetypal principles to the yin and yang, where the extremes touch and converge into one another. And here I've made a chart with all the qualities I could find on the Eros and Logos. I'll leave on the screen for a bit, but you can also find this chart in my book. Now, although both principles contain the four functions, as well as a union of conscious and unconscious qualities, for didactic purposes, we can say that the Eros principle is more closely related to the rational functions, namely sensation and intuition. In contrast, Logos is more closely related to the rational functions, namely thinking and feeling. Because one common mistake is to equate Logos with the thinking function and Eros with feeling. But to Jung, the feeling function is also rational, as it operates with categories and a clear scale of values. Regarding Eros, it's important to realize that irrational means extra-rational. In other words, it has a way of functioning distinct from the conscious mind, as it obeys the laws of nature. While thinking and feeling have clear categories, such as good and evil, in the unconscious the lines are blurred. A physical sensation and the symbolic images that arise from the unconscious don't have any judgment attached to them. They are pure experience, as judgments all always concern the conscious mind. That's why Jung equates logos with the sun, as under its glaring light we can clearly see things separated from one another, and it's possible to categorize, judge, and discriminate. It sees everything with equal dignity and from a position of detachment. Logos is also more closely related to the mechanism of introversion, since it creates impersonal abstractions and creates separations. Now, we can equate the Eros principle with the moon, as under its mild light everything dissolves and starts to blend with one another. The lines are blurred, and instead of division, we start seeing how things are related. That's why Eros is more closely related to the mechanism of extroversion, since it seeks to be merged with the objects. With Eros, everything is ambiguous and challenges our perception of good and evil. That's why dealing with the figures from the unconscious is so difficult, as they obey the laws of nature. They're always paradoxical, and contact with them can either give or take life. Eros has a very personal quality, and it's about relatedness and reunion. It has an earthy and chthonic quality. It connects us with the five senses and the body, while Logos is more abstract and about the spiritual realm. Logos is about knowledge, while Eros is about relationships. Logos is the principle of will and action. It wants to maintain and conserve things, while Eros is about openness, receptivity, and emptiness. Eros desires and longs, it's dynamic and about movement, and that's also why it's the principle of dissolution and transformation. Logos gives form and shapes the objects, it's the vessel which is filled by Eros. Logos is the demarcation of a river, while Eros is the very flow of water. Now, I started the video saying that we can equate the Animus and Logos with man and Eros and Anima with women, because these are psychological and archetypal principles that transcend gender. These are forces that have been present since the beginning of mankind, and their functioning can be found across all cultures in the syzygies. That said, it's important to understand that the unconscious is the receptacle of all human experience, both biological and cultural, and during the history of mankind, Logos was projected upon men and Eros upon women. This means that the conscious mind of man is identified with the Logos and the Eros is unconscious. As for women, their conscious mind is identified with Eros and Logos is unconscious. Why is that? Well, that's a metaphysical question that's impossible to have a definite answer. There's an amalgamation of psychological predispositions, biology, and culture. How much each of these components contributed to it is impossible to determine. Perhaps there's an alternative reality where things are switched, but in ours, that's how things have been operating. In theory, it's possible to have a man with a conscious Eros and a woman with a conscious Logos. Personally, I've never seen it. I had the pleasure of working with both homosexual and bisexual men and women, and their psyches always revealed the same psychodynamics and archetypal images. Again, we're not discussing gender, so the anima can be projected upon men and the animus can be projected upon women. In fact, both the animus and anima are responsible for most of our projections, regardless of gender, and this happens very frequently. In my personal experience, sexual preferences don't change that. However, we always have to see how things are operating on an individual level. That's why this remains an open question and I don't claim to have the truth. I can only share my studies and experience. Just understand that this isn't about feeling in a certain way. We have to follow an empirical approach, as theories mean nothing when not connected to reality. Now we're going to move to the second part and explore how the animus and anima are complexes and function as a compensation for the persona. Emma Jung says, Carl Jung understands these figures to be function complexes behaving in ways compensatory to the outer personality, the persona. That is, behaving as if they were inner personalities and exhibiting the characteristics which are lacking in the outer and manifest conscious personality. In a man, these are feminine characteristics, in a woman, masculine. Normally, both are always present to a certain degree, but find no place in the person's outwardly directed functioning, because they disturb his outer adaptation, his established ideal image of himself. Again, whenever you hear masculine, think about Logos, and feminine, you think about Eros. It's a good time to remember that the conscious and unconscious have a compensatory and complementary relationship, and the unconscious reacts to the conscious attitude. Consequently, the identification with Logos or Eros will generate a counterpart in the unconscious, which we will find personified, hence the animus and anima. And Emma Jung explains in her book Animus and Anima that there are three main factors that condition these complexes. First, the experience each person has with representatives of the opposite sex, the collective image women have about men and the collective image men have about women. And also the parental complexes play a great role. In men, the father complex serves as a basis for the persona and the mother complex as a basis for the anima. In women, things are switched. The mother complex serves as a basis for the persona and the father as a basis for the animus. So simply put, the relationship with the parents creates a blueprint about what to expect and how to relate with the opposite sex, and consequently with these inner figures. Moreover, the animus and anima act as a compensation for the persona, and just as the persona is the function of relationship with the external world, the animus and anima will be the function of relationship with the inner world. Lastly, Jung says, if I were to attempt to put in a nutshell the difference between man and woman in this respect, that is, what is that characterizes the animus as opposed to the anima, I could only say this. As the anima produces moods, so the animus produces opinions. And as the moods of a man issue from a shadowy background, so the opinions of a woman rest on equally unconscious prior assumptions. In a woman, logos will have the function of providing true insight, which aids the woman in crafting their particular worldview, instead of operating with prejudices and prior assumptions that tend to destroy their relationships. It gives the woman a connection with the spiritual realm, inspiration and drive to go after what she wants. While in the man, the anima has mainly the function to give him consciousness of his own emotional life, value system, insight about his relationships, and true purpose in life. Both these figures are also related to creativity and everything that can embellish life and our relationships. And finally, Jung says that the technical term for the animus and anima is the inferior function. However, we tend to find them personified, making the animus and anima the empirical observation of the inferior function. That's why it's also important to make a link with typology, as the animus and anima will acquire the opposite qualities of our main function. For instance, if you are a thinking type, it will acquire the qualities of feeling and vice versa. If you are an intuitive type, it will acquire the qualities of sensation and vice versa. And the same thing goes for introversion and extroversion. Well, this ends our exploration for today, but if you want to learn more, you can check the full course on the Animus and Anima at the Audacity University, where you can master Jungian psychology in 1 year to either become your own analyst or integrate these tools into your professional practice. You can learn all about the shadow integration process, psychological types, dream interpretation, and even active imagination. If you want a simple step-by-step to integrate the shadow, you can check my accessible course Katabasis, the Shadow Integration Manual. And stay tuned, because I'll also be posting videos dedicated to the Animus and Anima in this playlist. And finally, don't forget to claim your copy of my book Pistis, Demystifying Human Psychology. All links are in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.